If you are in a relationship and are not having the amount or quality of sex that you know is possible, this episode is for you. Welcome back to The Naked Connection. This is the show that supports driven men to reach sexual mastery and build deep connections. Take a moment and hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss a single episode. What's up, you guys? It's Kirsten, and today we are revisiting the topic of sexless marriages and specifically exploring what's unfolding in the act itself that might be leading you to no more sex. Because while external factors like stress, kids, work, money, those can all be leading to sexlessness, the quality and the type of sex you're having might be the true root cause. To explore this topic, we have sex therapist Susan Morgan Taylor here today. Susan was once herself in a sexless marriage, after which she was determined not to repeat the pattern and embarked on a study of sexuality. After more than a decade in private practice as a couples sex therapist and over 25 years of experience in somatic body-based approaches to healing and sexuality, Susan is here today to share how to build sexual experiences so that both you and your women want more. You guys, let's get some. It's spring break season. So whether you've got a first date lined up, a weekend getaway with that special someone, or just wanting to be prepared for unexpected intimacy that might strike while you're road tripping with your crew, the Handyman Rocket Man Special Edition from Manscaped is your new secret weapon. This sleek, portable face shaver keeps you looking sharp when it matters most, like that surprise morning after. The Handyman delivers on-the-go freshness that keeps you looking intentional and put together, no matter where the connection may lead. Here's the thing though, the Handyman Rocket Man is a limited edition release and they're moving so fast. Use code NAKED20 for 20% off plus free shipping at manscaped.com. Never worry about battery life again with a powerful 60 minutes of runtime so you won't be left half-shaved before a big night out. Plus, it's completely waterproof and mess-proof, making it perfect for those shared shower moments without leaving any cleanup evidence behind. Details matter when building attraction, and women notice the little things, including how you take care of yourself. Join the 12 million men who've upgraded their intimate experiences with Manscaped and get the Handyman Rocket Man while supplies last. Use code NAKED20 for 20% off plus free shipping at manscaped.com. Because when opportunity knocks, you want to open the door looking your best. Susan Morgan Taylor, welcome to The Naked Connection. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you, Kirsten, for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
From what I understand, your personal experience of being in a sort of a sexless relationship and marriage inspired you to really study sexuality and become a sex therapist. What, from your experience, creates this sexual desire difference, be it from your own experience or just everything that you've learned?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of things that can lead to it. A lot of times sexlessness is usually it's a symptom of other things that are happening in a relation or not happening or not happening in a relationship. And I know that was true with my story, like being married for 10 years and kind of in a sexless relationship, that sexlessness was really a symptom of a lot of other things that were going on in the relationship that were leading to my lack of interest, my lack of desire to be intimate with my husband, and really feeling super like sexually shut down and disconnected. And just like I was the one in that marriage that was like really not interested in sex. And what was so interesting is when that marriage ended, it was like night and day. Like my libido, my sex drive, it like came out of nowhere. And I was like, wow, I felt alive. I felt connected to life. I wasn't interested in being sexual with anybody immediately following the divorce. I really took time just to kind of heal and be single for a while and, there was this life force that came online inside of me. And it really made me realize that there's a lot of things contextually that happen in a relationship that can lead to that disconnect and to that loss of interest in sex over time, particularly in long-term relationships.
Yeah. And I'm wondering from your experience, I think it would be really interesting to be able to illuminate what that lack of desire can be like. You're married to someone that in many ways you love, and then at the same time, the desire isn't there, and maybe your partner is wondering why. There's frustration showing up. Just for helping a man kind of get some insight, maybe a peek into the window of what that experience could be like presently for their partner if they're
If
being
you're
like,
in,
I'm
so
in
for
this right now.
a guy listening who's experiencing this, what it was like for me was a lot of kind of giving in out of obligation and sort of just to keep my partner happy. What I didn't know at the time, and I think this is probably useful for your listeners to understand, is that I, like a woman needs to know her own body. We have to be connected with our own pleasure and our own capacity to actually feel what feels good for us. What do I want? What do I need? And to be able to not just identify that, but also to be able to communicate that in a way that my partner can hear it. And if we haven't even done that first piece of really knowing our own bodies and our own pathway to pleasure, our own pathway into orgasm, it's going to be nearly impossible for anybody else to figure that out for us. And what I see happens with a lot of men who are in these kind of dynamics where their female partner maybe isn't as interested in sex as they are, there's a lot of pressure, I think, on men to be the ones to figure it out. And I think as women, we're sort of fed that narrative also, like, well, the man should just know how to figure it out. And if he can't figure it out, he's not a good lover, or he just doesn't do it for me. And that is just it's really like not a productive stance to be in. So what I would offer to your male listeners is there would be encouragement for her to find what's in it for her, to learn her own body. And you can have, there's ways that you can encourage her to do that, of course, but until she figures that out and finds that pathway within herself, it's going to be very challenging for that to be brought into the relationship. I'll leave it there for a minute. And like, there's certainly other pieces that I could bring in on that and what guys could do, but that's one of them.
Yeah, this is something that I have witnessed even in some of the clients that I've worked with, as well as that they're wanting to engage and the woman is so shut down. And sometimes the response could be, I don't know what I want. And that is it can be so frustrating to be in that space of, I don't know. And so I'm wondering, because there is this sense of responsibility that we have to take as women to take action on that. And if a man is in that space with a partner who's saying, I don't know, and isn't taking action, then what?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a big part of it is the understanding there's a certain pathway to knowing how to know. Aside from working with a professional like myself, which is always a really great option, by the way. Like, there's no shame in needing help and support, I believe, from an outside source. But what's required for that is time and space. And what happens a lot is we're feeling rushed, or there's a sense of urgency. We feel a lot of times as women that, well, he's ready to go, so I need to just get up and get ready. Like, I got to make this thing happen. But the problem with that is that we're not giving our bodies time to actually to relax and to open so that we can find what that is. And if we're very disconnected from what do I want, what feels good for my body, it's going to usually take a lot more time. So if we can learn how to give that to ourselves, and if he can give that to her, take your time. There's no rush. And I'm not going to move or touch you until you let me know what would feel good for you. For example, right? If you really wanted to do this intentionally, it might be something like that. Like, take all the time that you need. There's no rush. I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not going to do anything until you let me know what it is that you desire. Take all day. Like, so that's kind of what's needed a lot of times, is that level of spaciousness, which we so rarely ever get or ever give ourselves. We're all trying to get to the act, right? Instead of, if we can just learn to slow down and notice what is happening in my body, what am I feeling in my body, and what do I need right now so that I could relax more, so that I could open more, so that I could trust my partner more. Because a lot of it comes down to that trust piece as well, right? There's a lot of vulnerability quality that has to happen for any of us to really come into our capacity to feel pleasure and to receive pleasure. We have to be willing to trust our body sensations and also trust the relational space and the person that we're with, and that it's a safe space to feel deeply. When I say trust, that's really what I'm referring to. Is this a safe space and a safe person so that I can feel deeply within myself? And, there's not gonna be like negative consequences for that, or that I can ask for what I need and I'm not going to be shamed or rejected or judged for that. That's another reason why we disconnect from our desire, some of those fears.
There's so much in this. And you mentioned that this sexlessness is really kind of a symptom, and it's sounding like one of the roots of this symptom could possibly be that the woman isn't connected to her own body, to her desires, and to
Right.
being able to communicate that or feeling safe communicating that. I'm wondering, what are some of the other things you've seen show up that could be creating this symptom of a couple
Yeah.
not being intimate?
Yes, right. So I work a lot with couples, and I work on this issue a lot with couples. But one of the things that also sometimes happening is he's coming at her in the way that would work for him. So she might not. So we're all kind of wired a little bit differently in terms of our arousal map. So this is one of the causes of what we call desire discrepancy. That's like the clinical term for mismatched libido. That's kind of how you hear it more generally in the lay community, but we call it desire discrepancy, or one partner wants it more than the other. And a lot of times what's happening is he's coming at her in a way that suits his arousal style. So he might have a style that's either explicitly sexual, meaning, sexual archetypes like just direct genital touch, let's get down to it, let's kind of go straight for it. Or you can also call it spontaneous arousal or spontaneous sexual desire, which I think it's something like 75% of men are wired in that way, where they just can like think about sex and they want it and they're like ready to go right away, right? Or see an attractive woman and they're ready to go. Whereas there's this other piece called contextual desire, where it's a little bit more complex. And I think it's maybe they say something around 35% of women have that. So there's a good portion of women that are sort of wired more contextually, or one of the different arousal maps, archetypes or blueprints, which some of them just take more time. It's more about having distance and teasing and more spaciousness, slowing down, not have any direct pressure for anything sexual to happen. So if he's coming at her immediately with wanting to get to sex, or in very overtly sexual ways, here's a common one that I see a lot of men do. Like he buys her a sexy outfit or a piece of lingerie and like lays it on the bed, like hoping she's going to put it on. And to her, that's like so offensive because now she feels pressure. She's got to put this thing on. It's for him. It's what he wants. Whatever's going on in her mind, maybe she's having body issue concerns, or she's not feeling sexy, or she doesn't feel like it looks good on her. Whatever the thing is, like it's not the thing that's actually opening her. That just shut her down. So some of like how you solve this issue is learning to speak each other's language and understanding specifically what is your arousal map? What is your why? And there's ways to determine this. It's one of the things we do at my couples retreats. I help my couples actually to discern what is their actual arousal map. And then a lot of the mystery is gone. And then there's just this clarity there. Then we know how we can actually activate one another in a way that works for that person. So if he can understand that and learn to speak her language, then he's going to have a lot higher chances of being successful in getting the sexual piece online.
Yeah, oh my goodness, this is making me think about like the erotic blueprints and how
Yes.
there's kinky and there's sexual
Yes.
and then there's romantic and there's psychologically kinky and then the physical kink and yeah, if someone is really sexual and that's kind of their blueprint of what they enjoy versus someone who is maybe more, I don't remember what they all are, but maybe more kinky.
Right.
You're kind of comparing two different things together. So no wonder you're not meeting each other and having the type of sex that you want. So it sounds like that, like the type of intimacy is a big piece of this.
Right. Like how do we access arousal? And yeah, I have studied the erotic blueprints and it's an aspect that I weave in. And I think there's other pieces that I think are so important to have that help that aspect really become easier. But understanding the blueprints are really important. And I think it's energetic, sensual, sexual, kinky, and shapeshifter. And there's tons within kinky. But right, if we're not like understanding the difference, once there's clarity and we understand that, then it's just there's less confusion. So a lot of this is really just creating that clarity. And the good thing is there's structures and tools out there to be able to get that clarity. But I
Mhm.
had a couple that I worked with at one of my retreats, and they had this exact problem. Like she was really they were having no sex because he was afraid to initiate because she had sometimes just really shut down, or even like he had hurt her sometimes. And she would kind of have sex with him just to kind of get it over with, or to keep him happy because he would get a little bit grumpy. But nobody was really happy in it. He was afraid of hurting her. And she was like, didn't really want to open up because it wasn't really doing it for her. She had tried to talk to him about it, it didn't really land. And so they just were like at this really confused place. But once we'd helped them discern how they were wired, just through different types of touch. And this wasn't about like overt sexual touch, just different types of touch. They realized she was wired more sensually and he was wired more kinky. He liked really intense touch and really firm, and, and she like sort of soft, slow, sensual. So they were able to really have that clarity. And then it wasn't such a mystery anymore. They were able to then negotiate some of these experiences together where they could both get what they want. And she also had to come up against some of her discomfort around giving that kind of a touch. Right. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
work I do with couples too. No one has to do anything they don't want to do, but we also have to learn about how to identify what our limits are. And also, how do we negotiate those experiences in a way where it's not going to be shaming or shutting anybody down? We're also not in that place where we're like, oh, he wants that kind of touch, so I'm just going to do that, even though I really don't want to be doing it. Like, I'm going to do it anyway. Like, that never creates more pleasure or more arousal or more connection or more desire for sexual intimacy when one of our partners is doing that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's hard because there's the person who's like, "Okay, I'm gonna do this because I know it's what you want." But the person receiving that, consciously or not, can tell you don't want to be doing this, and that doesn't feel good for anybody
Right.
in that
Well,
place.
that's where it really comes down. What I call like the three N's: notice, name, negotiate. Those are like three N's, the
Mhm.
pleasure keys. So I have this process called the pleasure keys that I've developed. And that's really like a fundamental aspect of it. And part of it comes down to the very first one, which is noticing. My ability to feel my own sensations, to notice my own body, to notice what I want, need, don't want, what I'm willing or not willing to give or do. Having that awareness is really the first step. And so if we haven't cultivated that first, it's very challenging to get to the next piece of where we're getting on the same page in sex, right? We have to have that there first. And then we have to understand, who is it? I mean, there's so much we could go on this. I'm going to pause and let you reflect for a minute, because I don't want to, there's other like tangents we could go down that I think are
Yeah.
so valuable, but I'll pause for a minute.
Yeah, I'm so curious about what these tangents that are coming up for you are in this moment. And when you were saying this, it kind of makes me think, sometimes my mind goes into creating analogies that have nothing to do with sex. And it sounds like, in a way, this is almost like as if you went into a job and you had no contract, nothing was signed. You don't really know what you're actually agreeing to, not agreeing to. And so, how could anybody be happy, fulfilled, move anywhere, is kind of what this is sounding a little bit like
It,
to me. If you haven't
yeah,
named what you want, if you haven't shared what is a no for you, what is a yes, what your desires are, you're
right.
kind of both just in the dark.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I think I love that analogy. And like, really, that the noticing is really just the first step in that, because there's this whole, I could give an example that might be helpful. I had a couple I was working with in private coaching, and they had gotten to a point where they were just avoiding sex because it had been what I call like train wreck, where like they'd come together intimately and then like it would just go downhill fast, and then everyone's feelings were hurt and there was just confusion and they didn't know how to find their way out of it. So they just were avoiding sex because it was so anxiety provoking to even think about getting intimate. So one of the things that was happening for them was, when they would be intimate, he would go down on her thinking like, well, I guess this is just like the next logical thing to do. And I think she wants this. I think she would like this. So I'm just going to go down on her. Meanwhile, in her head, she's never really been super into receiving oral sex. It just hasn't really been her thing. It doesn't really get her off. But in her head, she was thinking like, well, I'm supposed to like this. And he's doing this for him. I'm supposed to be having like orgasms and lots of pleasure reactions, but I'm not. So she starts to think, well, maybe there's something wrong with me because like, I don't really enjoy this. And then she felt bad. Like she had to produce some kind of result because she thought he wanted it. So one of the things that we did in our work was I helped them clarify who is this happening for. So this is one of those questions that this can be a little confusing at the outset, but we need to have the clarity of who is this happening for, because what was happening with this couple, what we discerned was that nobody actually wanted that. He didn't really, I mean, not that he minded going down on her, but he thought she wanted it. So he was going down on her thinking she wanted it. She was just kind of going along with it because she thought it's what he wanted and that she should like it. But at the end of the day, like nobody actually wanted that. Neither of them wanted that. So once we had that clarity, there was like, oh, it was like this sigh of relief. And then we started to identify other areas in their relationship and their sexual relationship where that was happening and learned how to start to clarify. So whenever there's like a train wreck or there's an issue, usually it's because there's some lack of clarity around who is this actually for right now. Couples are a lot of times like, well, it's for both of us. That's going to be the answer that I get all the time. And it's like, it's not. Like there are times where it is, where you both have the same desire and you're following that and it's great and everybody's happy. But the times where couples are having problems and where they come to see people like myself, where they're reaching out for help, there's a lack of clarity around who is this actually for? Whose desire are we following at any one moment? And when we can get clear on that, the sky is the limit. There's so much more fun that can be had and so much more pleasure that can live in that space when that clarity's there, because now nobody's tolerating, nobody's giving in out of obligation, nobody's doing something that they feel they have to do because the other person wants it. We clarify that. And clarity is really at the core of connection and confidence. And when we have that, that's what most people are wanting. We want to get on the same page. We want to feel more connected, more confident, have more fun, not have it be these train wrecks where there's anxiety and avoidance of intimacy, which is usually the case when there's desire discrepancy. Somebody is avoiding usually.
Yeah, I love that question. And even just for like thinking of that when a couple is moving through a sexual experience of recognizing in this moment what's going on and who is this for. And it sounds like there's kind of like an ebb and a flow of who's receiving, who's giving. And it in the example you're giving, it's making me think, I'm just imagining maybe if, let's say, a man really does enjoy going down on his partner and he enjoys giving that to her, and then at the same time she isn't really interested in that. How do you navigate that when someone's desire is different than their partner?
Well, okay, I love this question. And the oral sex is such a great example because this is where I see this happen a lot. We have to understand the difference between who's giving and who's receiving. So again, when we know who it's for, a lot of times that will answer the question. So if he's going down on her, is he doing it because he wants to see her have a good time? Is he trying to get her to get off and have pleasure? Is that what he's doing? That's probably a lot of times the case. Or is he doing it because he truly enjoys it really for himself? It gives him pleasure to do that. And whether or not she responds in a certain way is maybe, not the most important thing. Because what happens a lot of times is there's an overdependence on what's called indirect pleasure. So it shows up with oral sex a lot, where we're getting our pleasure from seeing the other person in pleasure. So if he goes down on her with the goal of having her have a certain reaction because that's what he wants for his enjoyment, now our wires are pretty crossed because she's going to feel there's a certain obligation to have to produce a result from this thing that she's not into. She's doing it for him. He's going to say it's for her, but it's actually what he's actually doing. It's really for him in that scenario. Her reaction is for him. Like he's wanting this reaction from her. So there's a lot of wires crossed, right? So if we can get that clarity, and again, there's a very clear pathway to this, and this is a lot of the work I do with couples is bringing in the framework. This is also why desire discrepancy is such an issue. We don't have a clear framework to see the problem through that makes it crystal clear. But we can have oral sex if she didn't have any obligation to have any kind of response, like, okay, you can just do this for me. It's for me. I'm going to follow my pleasure, and I'm the one receiving. I'm going to go down on you, but this is for me. I'm the one receiving. And all of the gift that she's giving at that point is just the access to her body. She didn't have to there's no pressure for her to have to really do anything. She doesn't have to feel anything. She doesn't have to groan or make noise or get pleasure from it. We don't want her in a place where she's just like gritting her teeth and putting up with it, because that would be tolerating. We're trying to unwind that pattern. But if she can, with a full heart, be like, go for it, go ahead. It's for you. Like, you want to have a good time. That's awesome. Like, you can have access to my body. So she's actually in a giving role and he is in a receiving role in that scenario. But the beauty of that is when it's clarified, no, there's no pressure anymore. Now he can, within the limits they've established, take what he wants, have his enjoyment, and there's no pressure on her to have to get anything out of it. So the clarity is really useful.
Yes. Yeah. Even as you're describing this, it sounds like a completely different dynamic and situation
Yes.
with understanding what's actually unfolding.
Foods for. Because if it was for her, if he was really doing it for her, it would look very, very different. What that would look like is, how do you want me how do you want me to touch you for your pleasure? How would you like me to stimulate you for your enjoyment? Her response to me, I don't want you giving me oral sex at all. I don't want oral sex. I want something totally different. If she did want oral sex, then it would be, we're following her desire. How would you like to arrange that? How would you like this? How's the pressure? Right? We'd be checking in. Is this what you had in mind? Like, it would be a very, very different dynamic for him to be in a giving role to her, following her desire, versus how the wires get all crossed, where it's really actually for him, but he says it's for her, and she doesn't really, she thinks it's for him, like it's
Yes.
it's a mess. It's a train wreck.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is making me think about how so often I've heard when talking with men that it's like, well, what do you want? And the response is, I just want you to feel good.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, can put a lot of pressure on someone
Absolutely.
if their sole enjoyment is, and it's so, in so many ways, that's such a beautiful thing to be like, what brings me joy is witnessing you enjoy and me being able to give that to you. And at the same time, I'm wondering, like, what is another way to either voice that or move through that?
Yeah. And so that's indirect pleasure, which is totally valid way of experiencing pleasure. The problem is we get too dependent on that. A lot of times that's where the problems happen. So how you would work with that, there's the other kind of pleasure, which is direct pleasure. And that's direct from the nerve endings in the body up to the brain. So we can work with this in a couple different ways. One of the first ways is getting both parts of the couple the ability to access direct pleasure. So that's a cultivation, it's a skill, and it can be done. And we just learn how to strengthen that muscle for direct sensation through the nerve endings in the body up to the brain. That's sort of the first step of that first the notice step. I have to have access to that within me, or I'm not going to be able to access my yes or my no, what I like or I don't like. Now, if a guy is wired, and as a lot of men are, they're very visual. And generally, I see a lot of men really love that. A man wants nothing more than to see a woman in deep pleasure and bliss. So, if she wants you to be happy, that's the pathway, is to try to help her get into her own body, which is very vulnerable for a lot of women and can be very scary for a lot of women to do that. So it's about exploring, I think, and asking the right questions. And again, taking the pressure off of her. There's no pressure, but the attention is on her. Experimenting, maybe even with different types of touch. Okay, you don't know. Let's experiment. Do you like this or do you like that? So we can start to play with it. It doesn't have to be so serious. If we don't know, which is very common, then we can be a little more playful with it and start to experiment with different types of touch and see, does this feel better than that when I do this? Do you prefer that or do you prefer this? So you start to learn each other's bodies, and that can help her start to allow herself to receive more. That's where you really want her. You want her deep in her own pleasure, right?
Yeah. Wow, this is so incredible. I love that I've had a couple of conversations about this dynamic that unfolds, and usually it goes away from the actual sex into some of the dynamics that are unfolding just generally in the relationship. And it's so beautiful to be able to explore it from this space of why, like, the sexlessness is a result potentially of what's actually happening when you're having sex.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is. And that's why I love, as a sex therapist, one of the reasons why I was so drawn to work with people around sexuality was because it's so direct. Like your sexual engagement is going to reflect all other aspects of how you're connecting in life or with one another. Right. It's sex to me too. It's not just penis and vagina or penetration. It's really about connection. Generally speaking, sex is how do I connect? How do I connect with my own body, with my own pleasure, my own sensations, with my own needs, wants, desires, etc. And how do I connect with others or with life? So we have this vertical alignment, me with self, higher self, universe, that connection there. But then also, how am I relating? We could even look at it in terms of like a lot of people might have heard of attachment theory, right? That's more of the relational space. How am I responding, reacting in relationship? And that's where a lot of the nuance work really comes in. It's about how we're showing up in that. And then we can start to work with that. And it's going to show up so beautifully in our sexuality because that's where we're the most vulnerable and the most sensitive and where we usually try to hide the most.
You described this sense of like, I think you said safety or creating a space so that a woman feels okay opening up and receiving in that way. I'm wondering what can happen, what can be done, what actions can be taken to move towards that.
I am such a huge proponent for really encouraging women to explore their own bodies. And again, it's really the direct pleasure, our capacity for direct pleasure. And my whole, my background, I had a whole sexual awakening. I left my marriage a couple of years later, was in another relationship, same pattern. I didn't want to recreate that pattern, but I had. And so that relationship didn't last very long, but where it left me was really realizing like I have got to become totally responsible for my own experience in sex or I'm not going to be happy because I kept making my partner responsible. Like, well, he's got to bring it. He's got to rock my world. Instead of, wait a minute, like, why don't I learn my own body and my own pathway to ecstatic states of pleasure? And so I made a date with myself once a week to touch myself intimately. And one of the things that I think we have to do is learn how to embrace what we find because we can't just say, people have this idea that sex should just be all the good feelings. Like it shouldn't be sadness or anger or rage or guilt or shame. This is sex. It's supposed to be happy and pleasurable. We have to, especially as the feminine aspect of the sexual relationship, we have to be willing to embrace everything that we find. And so in my case, when I started to really slow down, I started to notice sensation or lack of sensation is actually what I found in my genitals. I had a lot of lack of sensation. I had lots of orgasms, not a problem. But when I really slowed down and got present, there wasn't a lot of feeling there. What ended up happening is I just surrendered to that, the numbness that was there, a whole wave of sadness and grief and anger just came pouring out. And I had a lot of moments of just embracing that crying, sobbing, just letting it move through my body. And once I was able to do that, there was a lot more sensation down there. And to the extent that I went into a full body orgasmic state, like just a few weeks after kind of starting this experiment with myself. So if we as women can learn how to trust our bodies, trust the sensation. And I like the term embrace. It's really about dropping towards and embracing everything that arises. If we can have that level of trust first with ourselves, and then in a relational space with a partner where a partner's not getting freaked out by that, or they're not trying to fix it, or they're not like, oh my God, she's crying, what's wrong? But a partner that can just sit there and witness that is the opening. That's how we open like a flower. That's what we want. We want to open like a flower. And so from the men listening, there's a lot of that. There's nothing wrong. If your woman is giving you that's part of her energy, which is what he wants anyway. That's really what he's after, right? Is her radiance, her energy. When she's dropping deeply into that, there's a whole range. We have a whole spectrum that's in there potentially. Everything from the most positive, pleasurable feelings down to the dark and the dirty. And so if he can hold her in that and just be with her in that, not trying to fix it or make it wrong, not saying, why are you feeling that? Don't put her in her head, but just be there. That actually invites more of her opening and that develops more of the trust in the relational space. So that's really what I think needs to be done around this is women got to know their own bodies.
Oh yeah. Yes. And this piece of, I love that you mentioned that sex isn't, it doesn't just have to be this like positive, like happy experience. And that, I studied Tantra, and part of that is the actually inviting in of whatever is true, whether it is sadness or anger or frustration or
Yes.
grief. And
Right.
within a sexual experience, you can actually feel that more fully. And
Yes.
I'm wondering in this, and I'll just like from personal experiences, like some of the most beautiful orgasmic states I've had have come from a place of sadness or
Yeah.
pain, and it becomes this really beautiful and totally different
Yes.
experience. And so I'm wondering, and thinking about that, how this, if a couple isn't having the amount of sex or the type of sex that they're wanting, if a part of that could be, well, I'm really frustrated today, and the last thing I want to do is like pretend like things feel good. And so, and so I'm wondering if inviting in, okay, well, let's use this frustration, let's use this sadness, let's use this tiredness in our sexual
Yeah.
experience.
Absolutely. Because think about it. If you look at sex from the definition that I use, sex is about connection. If
Mhm.
we're feeling a certain thing, let's say frustration, and I'm like, I don't want to feel this. I'm supposed to be feeling something else, or I just don't want to feel frustrated. So I'm going to numb it out. I've automatically gone into a state of disconnect within myself. So
Mhm.
that's not going to engender more connection with a partner if I'm disconnected within myself. So one of the things is that again, it's that connection, what you said, truth. And I'll tell this to my couples. Like people are always like, I want more passion. How do we get more passion? Like, you want passion? I'll tell you the simplest way to do that, just start telling the truth. Like bring what's here now in
Mhm.
the fullest expression that you're capable of bringing it. Because that's like a muscle that we can develop as well, right? Can I allow myself to really feel the frustration, for example? And as
Mhm.
I do that, what else is with the frustration? And usually under frustration, there's a lot of helplessness. A lot of times
Mhm.
that's sort of the thing that's attached to it. Helplessness, grief, sadness, rage can be part of that. But automatically, when we come into truth to that degree, there's going to be way more energy released. And then there's more passion, and there's also more connection because now I'm being truthful within myself. There's no
Yes.
pretending.
Yeah. Yeah. That the connection really comes from being real.
Being real. And yeah, and the
Yeah.
essence of Tammy Tantra is really, well, it kind of depends on what path or school you're in, but ultimately it's a path of non-duality. So it's about seeing all things as part of the one. There's no separation. So that's where we kind of get distorted, right? We think that I shouldn't feel anger. I only should feel joy. Instead of, what if I just said yes to the thing that's here now, feel it fully, embrace through the act of embrace, allow that energy to move through me. And I will tell you, Kirsten, like what you said, you've had some of those experiences like through deep grief and crying, it shifts into orgasmic energy because it's part of our life force. I've had orgasmic experiences from feeling it was first deep fear and then anger and rage and then suddenly like a full body orgasm.
Mhm.
So like our emotions are tied into our life force energy, which is the orgasmic energy. It's an
Mhm.
aspect of who we are as human beings. And it's just when we try to separate one as good and the other as bad that then now we've got disconnect. So it's a matter of bringing them into union within ourselves. And then within the relationship, there's ways to do that too through practices and such.
I love this. Well, what have we not explored that you think might be one of the causes of this symptom, or yeah, just in thinking about this relational dynamic, this sexual dynamic, what have we not looked at yet that you're like, we cannot move forward unless we talk about
We
this?
did some of the most important ones, the ability to have, cultivating that direct pleasure, which is noticing, and there's practices to do that. The answer to who is it for, understanding that. And then I think, well, the third one we did touch on a little bit, but it's the framework, like actually having a framework that helps you make sense of what's going on. That's where a lot of couples are really stuck and why there's so much confusion. And so the framework is super, super important. It's very simple, actually, a little bit more
Mhm.
challenging when we really start to work. Like, I think the solution to a lot of things are simple, but it's like the application of it that really requires our deeper work and our deeper showing up that can be a little bit more difficult sometimes because now we're being asked to kind of show up in a different way and have a new relationship with some of these things now that we're able to see it. But when we have that piece in place, it's just like the lights come on. It's not so hard. And then we can work on the development of the skills to start to have a new experience. So I think that
Mhm.
that piece is really critical. And it's a piece that's really missing for a lot of couples out there.
Mhm.
Even in the coaching and sex therapy worlds, like you just don't tend to find that enough, in my opinion. I think we really
Yeah.
need to have that framework. And that's part of why I do the work that I do, is to bring that to my couples.
Yeah. And I guess in understanding that for someone that's listening, how do you start to begin the process of building out that framework? Like, what is something
Yeah,
they could
it's
do today to start
yeah,
this?
okay. You want to do something today? I would give you the practice of waking up the capacity for direct pleasure, which we do very, very, very simply. A very simple one of the simple practices called waking up the hands. I learned this from Dr. Betty Martin, who is an amazing sex educator, developed a body of work that I've studied extensively with called the Wheel of Consent's beautiful work. But learning how to actually slow down and begin to notice. So all you do is you pick up it can be any object, and just lay down, put some soft music on, and I mean, give yourself 10 or 15 minutes of this. And you just start to notice what sensations are available in the hands. We're just working, not, no genital, nothing's happening. Just within yourself, start to notice, what am I able to be aware of right now, just in my hands. And that practice over time, what that does, it starts to expand our capacity for direct pleasure. And that the first N of the three N's that I was sharing, that's the capacity to notice. And we're
Mm.
not trying to get anywhere. There's no goal, there's no outcome. We're not doing anything other than, I'm going to strengthen this muscle of noticing. And we do it that simply, just starting with the hands. And then
Mm.
from there, we can expand, but it's more than what we can get into today. So maybe
Yeah.
people can come to one of my
Right
retreats,
there.
I guess, if
Yes.
they want to learn more.
Yeah. Yeah. No, what a great way to begin just exploring the body and the response that can happen from light touch, soft touch, different touching different places of the body. What is it that
Yes.
you actually want to experience?
I think that, yeah. And I think even if you wanted a more like explicitly sexual practice, this is what I did with myself when I was going through my whole journey into the study of my sexuality over a decade ago, is taking time to touch yourself differently. Because a lot of times what we're doing, I even like the word, like, I like self pleasure usually over masturbation or a sensation mapping practice, even something like that, where
Mm.
pleasure isn't necessarily even required, where all we're doing is slowing down and we're just starting to notice genitally, what do I feel and where? And yeah, does this feel better than that? How does this feel? What happens here? And getting rid of the idea that orgasm is the goal or climax is the goal of a self pleasure practice. Because when we're in that mindset, it actually gets us on one pointed focus to the extent that we kind of block out a lot of other things. And we actually reduce our capacity for orgasmic experience when we're just solely focused on the outcome of climax.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like rewiring our brain to a totally different approach of slowing down, becoming more present, more aware, and getting rid of this goal orientation. So that's
Mhm.
another thing that people could
Mhm.
do as well. If they really want to like get dedicated and start having new orgasmic experiences and deeper connection, like that practice is absolutely invaluable.
Especially when looking at like male sexual dysfunction, one of the best
Yeah.
ways to start shifting that is to build in different ways of self pleasure, of masturbation to kind of rewire the brain so it isn't step one, step two, step three
Right. We
done
get so
or yeah.
Yeah, get really habituated, especially if you're using pornography as a tool. It can really just lead to sort of like, right, you get like this one path to climax. And what will happen a lot of times for the men out there that are or women listening too, who are interested in having a new pathway, you're probably going to experience like not getting an erection at first, right?
Mhm.
There's going to be like, oh, I just don't, or you're not going to feel anything. There's going to be a lack of sensitivity because there's been so much focus on sensation. So there's a
Mhm.
real difference between the cultivation of sensitivity and then like sensation based stimulation, which most masturbation is just, yeah, stimulate it, get it off, and now I'm good and go on to the next thing, versus let me slow down. I want to create new pathways. And that will help with some of the dysfunction that men face. with ED and even premature ejaculation, learning how to slow down, breathe, and be more present in the penis, and then cultivating these different pathways to climax or not even letting climax be the main course of that whole engagement, which I know is a novel idea for a lot of men, but there's a benefit to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Well, Susan, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this. It was really a joy to have a conversation about sexlessness related to what's actually happening during sex. So I really appreciate all of your insight. I know this was just one topic of many that you have such insight and knowledge into. And so if anyone wants to attend one of your retreats or connect with you, where can they find you?
Well, thank you so much. Yes. And I do have for some of this conversation, I forgot, but I do have an ebook if anybody wants to kind of go a little deeper with what I just said there with the cultivating that direct pleasure. So they can get that at pleasurekeys.com. It's like just a downloadable PDF ebook. And then for retreats and other offerings, pathwaytopleasure.com. And all of my stuff lives there. And we've got amazing couples retreats coming up and would love to have anybody who feels called join us for those.
Amazing. Well, Susan, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate you joining
Kirsten.
us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Naked Connection. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Trust me on this, your sex life and that special someone in your life will thank you for it. And if you really love the show, please take a moment and leave a 5-star review or a written review and let me know what you think. It would mean so much to me and this show. Until next time, happy connecting.